Germany is a country that prides itself on order, on precision, and on the Ordnung that governs everything from railway timetables to the correct method of separating your recycling. It is also a country that contains, per square mile, more classified history, sealed infrastructure, and genuinely inaccessible places than almost anywhere else in Europe. Scattered across its forests, its cities, its flat eastern plains, and its Bavarian mountains, there are places surrounded by fences, sealed by governments that no longer exist, locked behind concrete, poured in the dead of night, and protected by the particular silence of things that powerful people decided it was better not to discuss in public. Some of them are military. Some are the physical residue of a century that Germany has spent 8 decades trying to process. Some are sealed because they are genuinely dangerous. And some are sealed because opening them would require answering questions that nobody in an official position is ready to answer. 17 of them spread across a country whose history is buried as often as it is displayed, and you will never see a single one, not legally anyway. Come on, subscribe and let's start. Number 17. Grafenwohr Training Area, Bavaria. In the rolling forests and farmland of the Upper Palatinate in northeastern Bavaria, there is a stretch of land covering roughly 234 square miles that has been off limits to the German civilian population for so long that most people in the surrounding villages have stopped thinking about what goes on behind its perimeter fence. The Grafenwohr Training Area is the largest active military training installation in Europe and the biggest piece of land the United States Army controls anywhere outside the continental United States. It has been in continuous military use since 1907, which means it was training soldiers before the First World War began, through both world wars, through the entirety of the Cold War, and it is training soldiers right now as you read this. The base occupies land that once belonged to Bavarian farmers and foresters. After the United States Army took it over following the Second World War, the surrounding communities were compensated and relocated, and the wire went up and has not come down. Today, approximately 13,000 American troops and their families live on the installation in a complete American town with its own schools, shops, cinemas, and medical facilities that happens to be located in Germany and is entirely inaccessible to German. When live fire exercises are underway, warning lights at the perimeter flash and the sound of tank rounds and artillery carries across the Bavarian countryside for miles. The forests within the boundary have been shaped by a century of military use. Unexploded ordnance from decades of training exercises is distributed across the land in quantities that make any unsupervised entry not merely illegal but genuinely inadvisable. You can drive the roads that border Grafenwohr and watch the tree line on the other side of the fence. That is your lot. Number 16. Ramstein Air Base, Rhineland-Palatinate. About 100 kilometers west of Frankfurt, on the rolling agricultural land of the Kaiserslautern military community, there's a piece of America that happens to be located in Germany. Ramstein Air Base is the largest American Air Force installation outside the United States. It covers roughly 3,100 acres, employs approximately 54,000 American military personnel, contractors, and their dependents, and serves as the primary logistics and command hub for American military operations across Europe, Africa, and the Middle East. The flight line at Ramstein is one of the busiest in the world. Aircraft that carry no visible national markings land and depart at hours that the base does not announce in advance. Ramstein has been in American military hands since 1952 under a bilateral defense agreement between the United States and the Federal Republic of Germany. Under that agreement, the United States exercises effective sovereignty over the base, and the German government has no routine access to its operations. What happens at Ramstein is governed not by German law, but by the Status of Forces Agreement, a document whose details are themselves classified in significant part. Reports by German investigative journalists have identified Ramstein as a relay station for the data links used in American drone operations across North Africa and the Middle East. The German government has consistently stated it is unable to confirm or deny the specific activities conducted at the base. The surrounding German towns of Ramstein-Miesenbach and Kaiserslautern have grown up around an installation that most of their residents have never been inside and never will be. Number 15. Sennelager Training Area, North Rhine-Westphalia. On the edge of the Teutoburg Forest in North Rhine-Westphalia, spread across roughly 120 square kilometers of heathland south of the town of Paderborn. There is a military training area that the British Army has been using since 1945 and that contains beneath its surface a quantity of unexploded ordnance from over a century of live fire exercises that the Army itself has never fully catalogued. The Sennelager training area, operated by the British Army's Garrison Sennelager, is one of the largest military training grounds in Germany and one of the few places in Western Europe where it is possible to be killed by a stray artillery shell on a Tuesday afternoon without having done anything especially unusual. The land was originally acquired by the Prussian military before the First World War and has been in continuous military use since. After 1945, the British Army inherited it as part of the Rhine Army's training estate and has been conducting live fire exercises there ever since. The heathland that occupies the non-firing portions of the training area is ecologically significant, supporting species of plants and insects that have been eliminated elsewhere in Germany by agriculture and development. The military zone has inadvertently preserved them by keeping everyone out for 120 years, which is the same irony that applies to similar military training lands across Europe and which never quite stops being remarkable. Access to Sennelager without military authorization is prohibited. The warning signs at the boundary are in both English and German. They mean the same thing in both languages. Number 14. Dora Mittelbau Sealed Tunnel Network, Thuringia. Near the city of Nordhausen in Thuringia, carved into the Kohnstein mountain by tens of thousands of concentration camp prisoners between 1943 and 1945, there is an underground factory complex that produced the V-2 rocket, the world's first long-range ballistic missile, at a scale that the outside world did not fully appreciate until the war ended and the Americans and Soviets rushed in to see what the Germans had built. The Mittelbau Dora Memorial Site is open to visitors. The accessible section of the tunnel network takes you through the main production hall and gives a reasonable impression of what it looked like when it was operational. The rest of the underground complex, which is substantially larger than the accessible portion, is sealed. The full tunnel network extends for miles through the Kohnstein. During production, it held not just the assembly lines, but dormitories where prisoners slept between shifts in conditions that the camp's own records describe in terms that no summary can adequately convey. Approximately 20,000 people died at Dora. They are buried in the surrounding ground and in graves that have never been fully accounted for. The sealed sections of the tunnel network are closed, partly because of structural instability, and partly because archaeological work in the sealed areas is still ongoing and has never been completed. The entrance to the accessible section is carefully managed. Beyond it, the mountain continues in darkness that no visitor is permitted to enter. The V-2 rockets built here killed thousands of people in London and Antwerp. The people who built them paid a price that the accessible section of the memorial conveys imperfectly, and the sealed sections do not convey at all. Number 13. Tempelhof Airport Underground, Berlin. Tempelhof Airport closed in 2008, and the surface of the airfield is now a park. Berliners fly kites on the runways, cycle the perimeter, and picnic on the grass where American transport planes landed during the Berlin airlift of 1948 and 1949. It is one of the more pleasant repurposings of a major piece of 20th century infrastructure that you will find in any European city. What lies beneath the surface of Tempelhof is a different matter. The terminal building, one of the largest structures in the world when it was completed in 1941 to Albert Speer's design, and a building whose footprint covers more ground than the Pentagon, contains floors and sections that are not accessible to the public. Beneath the terminal, the Nazi-era tunnel and bunker network extends into the ground at depths that no current guided tour visits. During the Second World War, the underground sections of Tempelhof served as bomb shelters, storage facilities, and manufacturing space for aircraft components produced by forced labor. The extent of the underground network was not fully documented during the post-war period, and subsequent construction and renovation work has further complicated any attempt to map it comprehensively. Guided tours of Tempelhof's above-ground historical sections are available by appointment. The underground infrastructure, including sections where the structural integrity has never been assessed to a standard that would permit public access, is not. The airport that Hitler intended to be the gateway of a reordered Europe now has its most significant stories locked in the ground beneath a park where people walk dogs on Sunday. Number 12. Prora, Rügen Island, On the Baltic coast of Rügen Island, facing the sea across a wide sandy beach in one of the most pleasant stretches of coastline in northern Germany, there is a building that stretches for 4.5 kilometers and contains approximately 10,000 rooms. The Prora complex was begun in 1936 as the centerpiece of the Nazi Kraft durch Freude, or Strength Through Joy program, which was the regime's mechanism for providing state-organized leisure to German workers. The idea was that 20,000 workers could take their state-subsidized holiday simultaneously in an 8-building complex that ran the full length of the beachfront. The complex was never used for this purpose. Construction stopped in 1939 when the war began, and the buildings were repurposed as military barracks, a military hospital, and later as East German Army accommodation. After reunification, Prora sat in various states of decay and legal uncertainty for years. Sections have been converted into a hostel, apartments, and a small documentation museum. But the Prora complex is vast, and the converted portions represent a fraction of the whole. The majority of the original structure remains in states ranging from partial renovation to complete abandonment. The sealed sections contain original Nazi-era infrastructure, including room layouts, fixtures, and structural elements that have not been significantly altered since construction. Access to the unrenovated sections is restricted by the owners of the various parcels into which the complex has been divided. A beach that should have hosted the holidays of the German working class in 1940 instead hosted the architectural ambitions of a regime that did not survive long enough to fill the rooms it built. Number 11. Beelitz-Heilstätten, Brandenburg. About 40 kilometers south of Berlin, in a pine forest outside the town of Beelitz, there is a complex of approximately 60 buildings that was constructed between 1898 and 1930 as a sanatorium for tuberculosis patients from Berlin. In the autumn of 1916, a wounded corporal from the 16th Bavarian Reserve Infantry Regiment was brought to the men's sanatorium at Beelitz-Heilstätten to recover from a shrapnel wound sustained at the Battle of the Somme. His name was Adolf Hitler, and he spent 2 months recovering there before returning to the front. Between 1945 and 1994, the facility served as the main military hospital for Soviet forces in East Germany. After the Soviets withdrew in 1994, the complex was abandoned. Most of it has been sealed since. The main hospital buildings contain operating theaters, ward facilities, and administrative spaces that were left largely intact when the Soviets departed. Soviet-era wall paintings and signage are still in place. Medical equipment of varying vintage sites where it was left 30 years ago. The structural condition of most buildings is poor, with water infiltration, subsidence, and decades of unchecked deterioration having progressed to the point where the interiors are not safe for uncontrolled access. A treetop walkway was installed above one of the sealed buildings, allowing visitors to look across the roof without entering the structure below. It is the architectural equivalent of being told you can look but not touch, applied to a piece of European history in unusually direct fashion. The buildings themselves are behind fences. The fences are marked. What is inside them has been waiting for someone to decide what to do with it for 30 years, and the decision has not yet arrived. Number 10. Spree Park, Berlin. In the Plenterwald forest in the Treptow district of Berlin, accessible by the Spree River and by a road that passes a locked gate and a security fence, there is an amusement park that has been closed since 2001 and has not operated normally since several years before that. The Spree Park was the only amusement park in East Germany during the period of the German Democratic Republic. It opened in 1969 as the Kulturpark Plenterwald and was a genuine attraction, drawing over 1.5 million visitors annually in its peak years. After reunification, it was privatized, and its final operator, Norbert Witte, drove it into insolvency before fleeing to Peru in 2002 with his family and a quantity of heroin concealed inside 5 fiberglass flamingo decorations from the park, which is not a sentence that appears often in the history of European amusement parks. Witte was eventually arrested in Peru and extradited back to Germany. The park passed through various legal proceedings, was acquired by the Berlin city government, and has been the subject of redevelopment plans for years. In the meantime, it sits sealed and inaccessible, its rides slowly rusting in the Brandenburg forest, its Ferris wheel visible above the trees from the river. The dinosaur sculptures that were among the park's signature decorations still stand in the undergrowth, weathering slowly under trees that have had 20 years to grow unchecked. Occasionally, the smell of the forest and the distant sound of the spree are interrupted by the sound of the Ferris wheel swaying in the wind. The gate at the entrance is locked. The security firm whose number appears on the signs is the kind that does not give tours. Number 9. Jüterbog Soviet military town, Brandenburg. About 60 kilometers south of Berlin, in the flat agricultural landscape between the Flaming Hills and the Elbe Valley, there is a former Soviet military town covering several thousand hectares that was, at its operational peak, home to approximately 40,000 Soviet troops and their families. The Soviet Jüterbog garrison was established in 1945 when the Red Army arrived from the east, and it operated as a self-contained Soviet military settlement for nearly 50 years. The town within the garrison had its own schools, hospitals, cinemas, shopping facilities, and housing blocks in which the domestic life of Soviet communism was maintained on German soil, entirely separate from the German civilian population that existed on the other side of the wire. The Soviets left in 1994 under the terms of the German Reunification Agreement. They left behind them a landscape so contaminated with unexploded ordnance, chemical residues from military training, and structural hazards from abandoned infrastructure that significant portions of the former garrison remain inaccessible to this day. The contamination is not theoretical. Unexploded shells, grenades, and chemical compounds from Soviet training exercises are distributed through the soil across a large area and have never been fully cleared. Parts of the former garrison are now managed as a nature reserve where, as at other European military training grounds, decades of human exclusion have created habitats of considerable ecological value. The housing blocks and administrative buildings of the Soviet town still stand in various states of decay, sealed by security fencing. The Lenin monument that once stood in the main square has been removed. Most of what surrounded it has not. Number 8. Wunsdorf, the Forbidden City, Brandenburg. Subscribe to prove that these videos actually help and actually make sense. 40 kilometers south of Berlin, surrounded by pine forest, behind a fence that has separated it from the surrounding German community for the better part of a century, lies Wunsdorf. It was the military headquarters of Kaiser Wilhelm II's Germany during the First World War. It became the Wehrmacht's military command center during the Second World War, where the Maybach I and Maybach II compounds housed the Army and Supreme Command headquarters in buildings designed to look like country estates but concealing bunkers beneath. After 1945, it became the headquarters of the Soviet Army in Germany, the largest Soviet military installation outside the Soviet Union itself. At its peak, Wunsdorf housed up to 75,000 Soviet troops and their dependents. The locals called it the Forbidden City, German territory where German law, German police, and German civilians did not go. The Soviets maintained Lenin statues, Russian language schools, a garrison cinema, and a complete Soviet domestic infrastructure on the site until their departure in 1994. They left the infrastructure largely intact. The underground Zeppelin bunker, built by the Wehrmacht as a communications hub and used by both Nazi military command and Soviet forces through the Cold War, is accessible under organized conditions. The surface buildings of the Maybach compounds were largely destroyed by the Soviets in 1945, but their footprints remain. Most of the Soviet-era accommodation blocks, administrative buildings, and service infrastructure that remains on the site is sealed and deteriorating. Wunsdorf today operates as a limited heritage site with some organized tours. But the tours cover a fraction of what is there, and the rest is behind fencing with warning signs that the site management does not particularly want to discuss. Number 7. West German government bunker, Ahrweiler, Rhineland-Palatinate. In the wine-growing valley of the Ahr River, in the gentle hills south of Bonn, that were once the seat of government of West Germany, there are several kilometers of tunnel carved into the volcanic rock of the valley wall that were, between 1960 and 1997, the designated emergency capital of the Federal Republic of Germany. The government bunker at Marienthal, built initially inside former railway tunnels and then substantially expanded, was designed to house 3,000 essential government personnel for 30 days following a nuclear strike that destroyed Bonn and the rest of West German civilization above ground. It contained 897 offices, 936 dormitories, 25,000 doors, an underground hairdresser, a dentist surgery, a hospital, a printworks capable of producing official government documents and telecommunications infrastructure entirely separate from the civilian network. For decades, its existence was classified under German security law. The government rehearsed governing from it in annual exercises, codenamed Phalanx, that involved senior officials disappearing into the tunnel system for days at a time, while the surface world continued under the impression that nothing unusual was happening. The bunker was decommissioned in 1997, following German reunification and the loss of its strategic rationale. It was gutted at a cost of 16 million euros. A small documentation museum now occupies a fraction of the tunnel network and is open to visitors on specific days. The remainder of the network, stripped of its contents but structurally intact, is sealed. The wine from the Ahr Valley is excellent and widely available. The tunnels beneath it are not. Number 6. Teufelsberg, NSA. Field Station, Berlin. In the Grunewald forest on the western edge of Berlin, there is an artificial hill 80 meters high built from the rubble of approximately 400,000 buildings destroyed during the Second World War. Beneath the rubble is an Albert Speer design, a Nazi military technical college that was so heavily reinforced that the Allies found it impossible to demolish after the war and chose instead to simply bury it under the ruins of the city that Speer's patron had destroyed. On top of this hill, which the Berliners call Teufelsberg, Devil's Mountain, the United States National Security Agency built one of the most important Cold War surveillance stations in the world. Field Station Berlin was operational from the early 1960s until 1991. It was staffed by up to 1,500 American and British intelligence personnel at its peak, operated jointly with the British GCHQ, and was part of the global Echelon Signals Intelligence Network. Its task was to intercept radio transmissions, military communications, and satellite signals from East Germany, the Soviet Union, and the Warsaw Pact countries. What it collected and what was done with the information remains classified. The station was closed following the fall of the Berlin Wall, and the building was sold. The outer structure now hosts installations by graffiti artists, and a fee-paying tour of the exterior is available. The intersections of the facility, the classified operational spaces, the equipment vaults, the communications infrastructure remain sealed. The details of what was collected from this hilltop for 30 years are still covered by oaths that the people who took them have not been released from. The buried Nazi college beneath it has not been entered since it was covered in 1950. Number 5. The Honecker Bunker, Brandenburg. In a forest outside the village of Harnikop, about 60 kilometers northeast of Berlin, there is a bunker that was built between 1978 and 1983 at a cost that the East German government classified and is never publicly disclosed. The facility, known officially as Bunker 17/5001 and unofficially as the Honecker Bunker after the East German leader who authorized its construction, was the most sophisticated nuclear survival facility in the entire Warsaw Pact outside the Soviet Union itself. Its purpose was to ensure that the leadership of the German Democratic Republic and the command structure of the National People's Army could survive a nuclear exchange and continue to govern whatever remained. The bunker sits 24 meters underground. It was built to operate under positive air pressure, ensuring that contaminated outside air could not enter. The pressure doors, of which there were 20, sealed automatically within fractions of a second of detecting a pressure change. The facility's air filtration systems could remove biological, chemical, and nuclear contaminants. Its water supply, power generation, and food stores were sufficient to sustain 400 people for 6 weeks. There were dormitories, command rooms, communications facility, and every piece of infrastructure required to maintain the pretense of government while the country above was rendered uninhabitable. The East German state that this bunker was built to protect collapsed in 1989 without the bunker ever being needed. The West German Bundeswehr sealed it in 1993 after removing the generator. It has been hermetically sealed in the forest ever since. No public access exists. No tours are organized. The pressure doors that would have sealed within fractions of a second have been sealed for 30 years. Number 4. The Obersalzberg Bunker Network, Bavaria. The Obersalzberg, the mountain retreat above Berchtesgaden in the Bavarian Alps, where Adolf Hitler maintained his private residence, the Berghof, and where the Nazi leadership assembled a compound of villas, administrative buildings, barracks, and supporting infrastructure, was bombed by the Royal Air Force on April 25, 1945, 12 days before Germany's unconditional surrender. The surface buildings were largely destroyed in the bombing, and what remained was demolished in the following decade, partly for safety reasons and partly to prevent the site from becoming a place of pilgrimage. The Eagle's Nest, a conference pavilion built on the summit of the Kehlstein for Hitler's 50th birthday in 1939, was preserved and is now a restaurant accessible to tourists. The underground bunker network beneath the Obersalzberg was not destroyed. It still exists. The tunnel network beneath the mountain was built between 1943 and 1945 to provide bomb-proof shelter for the Nazi leadership and extended for several kilometers through the rock. It included Hitler's personal underground living quarters, bunkers for Göring, Bormann, and the SS leadership, an underground hospital, ammunition stores, and connecting passages linking the various compounds. The network is sealed. The Bavarian state, which owns the land, has made a deliberate policy decision to restrict access to the underground sections beyond what is required for the documentation center that occupies one building on the surface. The policy is explicitly motivated by the desire not to create a site that neo-Nazis could treat as a monument. The tunnel network will remain sealed as long as that policy holds. The bunker in which some of the most consequential and catastrophic decisions in the history of the 20th century were made is in the ground beneath a mountain in Bavaria, and you are not getting in. Number 3. The BND Federal Intelligence Service Headquarters, Berlin, on Chausseestrasse in the Mitte district of Berlin, occupying a site of roughly 260,000 square meters in the heart of the reunified German capital. There is a building that is simultaneously one of the largest and most visible and one of the most completely inaccessible structures in Germany. The headquarters of the Bundesnachrichtendienst, Germany's Federal Foreign Intelligence Service, was completed in 2019 at a cost of approximately 1.1 billion euros and was described at the time as the world's largest intelligence agency headquarters by floor space. 14,000 employees work inside it. Almost nothing else about what happens inside is publicly available. The BND occupies the equivalent function in Germany that the CIA occupies in the United States and the Secret Intelligence Service occupies in Britain. It collects foreign intelligence, conducts operations abroad, and reports to the German government on matters that the German government considers sensitive. The Chausseestrasse building replaced the BND's previous headquarters in Pullach, near Munich, which had itself been built on the site of a Nazi party compound and had been in intelligence use since the immediate post-war period under the direction of former Wehrmacht General Reinhard Gehlen, whose biography represents a chapter in the history of German intelligence that the agency discusses with careful selectivity. The new Berlin headquarters is surrounded by security infrastructure, monitored perimeters, and the particular kind of quietness that large buildings full of people who are professionally committed to not being observed generate as a matter of institutional culture. You can walk past it on Chausseestrasse and look at the facade. The facade is very large. Everything behind it is not your business. Number 2. The Führerbunker site, Berlin. At the corner of Gertrud Kolmarstrasse and in den Ministergarten in central Berlin, there is a car park. Next to the car park is an apartment building. There is a small information board mounted at the edge of the car park that explains, in German and English, that the site of the Reich Chancellery building and the Führerbunker is located here. The board is modest in size, deliberately so. Beneath the car park and the apartment building, the bunker where Adolf Hitler spent the final months of his life and where he died on April 30th, 1945, still exists. It has been sealed since the Soviet Army surveyed it in May 1945, and it remains sealed today. The bunker was an extension of the old Reich Chancellery, built in 1943 and expanded in 1944 to provide Hitler with a bomb-proof living and command facility beneath the garden of the Chancellery. It had 18 rooms, walls 2.5 meters thick of reinforced concrete, its own water supply, ventilation systems, and generating capacity. Hitler moved into it permanently in January 1945. He died in the study by his own hand, 12 days before Germany's unconditional surrender. The Soviets partially destroyed the interior in 1947. The East German government further sealed it in 1959 and demolished the above-ground chancellery remains. After German reunification, the decision was made not to mark the site in any prominent way. The official reasoning is straightforward. A clearly marked, accessible, commemorated Führer bunker would become a destination for people whose interest in the location is not historical. The car park above it is therefore deliberate. The sealed concrete chambers below it are also deliberate. You will find the EC information board if you look for it. You will not find anything else. Number 1. The sealed East German Stasi Headquarters Archive, Berlin. On Ruschestrasse in the Lichtenberg district of Berlin, occupying a vast complex of buildings that covers several blocks of what is otherwise an ordinary residential neighborhood, there is the former headquarters of the Ministerium für Staatssicherheit, the Ministry for State Security, which is better known by the name that the East German population used for it, the Stasi. The surface complex, or parts of it, are open as a museum. The Stasi Museum on the site draws visitors from across the world to see the offices, the surveillance equipment, and the physical evidence of a secret police apparatus that employed one full-time officer for every 63 East German citizens, a ratio of surveillance to population that no state before or since has matched. What most visitors to the Stasi Museum do not see, and what the museum itself does not publicly detail, is the full extent of the archive. When the Berlin Wall fell in November 1989, Stasi officers began destroying records at a rate that required industrial paper shredders running 24 hours a day. They managed to destroy a significant quantity before East German citizens occupied the buildings and stopped them in January 1990. What they did not destroy, or did not finish destroying, is an archive of approximately 111 kilometers of files, 1.4 million photographs, 2,800 reels of film, and 15,400 bags of hand-shredded documents that the German authorities are still attempting to reconstruct using scanning technology. The reconstruction project, started in 1995, is not complete and is not expected to be complete for decades. The files that have not yet been processed, the reconstructed shredded material still being pieced together, and the sections of the archive that are subject to ongoing legal processes related to prosecution of former Stasi officers are not publicly accessible. The sealed portions of the Stasi archive contain the operational records of the most thorough domestic surveillance apparatus in the history of the modern state. They are being opened piece by piece as the law and the technology permit. Most of them are not open yet. The neighborhood around the former headquarters is quiet and residential. The archive it contains is one of the most consequential collections of sealed documents in Europe, and the process of unlocking it will outlast everyone who is currently working on it. Germany's forbidden places are not forbidden without reason. From the bunkers built to survive the end of civilization to the car park above the room where civilization's worst chapter closed, from the sealed spy stations to the archives that document how a state turned its surveillance apparatus on its own people, every fence in this country has a history behind it. Some of the fences are military, some are political, some are ecological, and some are the particular fences that exist because some things, once seen, cannot be unseen, and someone somewhere decided that the seeing should be controlled. The forbidden places of Germany are the places where the 20th century left its deepest marks. You will not be visiting them, but knowing they exist is something they cannot take from you. If this video was worth your time, hit the like button. It makes a genuine difference. And if you want to know what else Europe is keeping behind its locked doors, subscribe. There is a great deal more to find.